Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 590. Currently available on digital and streaming is Bliss of Evil, a 1997 set horror film in which a grunge band finds themselves locked inside a music studio and preyed upon by a demented killer. An Australian-made indie slasher of tense atmosphere, dense subject matter, and bloody kills. Bliss of Evil proves to be a great addition to the thriving Australian horror scene. And joining me now is the co-writer, producer, and star of Bliss of Evil, Mr. Corrie Hinschen. Corey, how are you today?
I'm very well, Matthew. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. When I got approached about Bliss of Evil, I'm always on the lookout for not only talking to like Aussie filmmakers, but horror is just like my thing, my genre. You could tell by the
Really, I
posters
couldn't
behind me and
tell with
such.
the
You,
Exorcist
you,
like soundtrack
you,
behind you and all this
no.
stuff and Jaws.
No, Jaws and all that. No, of course not. But what I love about this movie is that, like I said in my intro, it's a 1997 set movie. So I was around 16 in 1997. And
Mhm.
what you guys are doing in this movie, going to a rehearsal studio with a band and practicing and such, that's what I did when I was 16 years old. I had a band, I was a bass player, I had a metal band. We went to a rehearsal studio about 10 minutes from where I am now. And I know what it's like to be in bands. It could be a really kind of like thrilling thing, but at times it could be a really combustible kind of like clash of all these personalities and stuff coming together. And from what I understand is that some of the former bandmates you had over the years, especially back in that time, some of the more, say, extreme former bandmates, they kind of like set the tone, set the influence, set the germ of an idea for what we see in Bliss of Evil. Can you just explain a little more about that? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, that's correct. Well, I was a young teen in 97 myself. Um, we set the film in 97 mainly because we all grew up in that time period. Like I was in bands quite young, like 18 or so, but that was in like the early to mid 2000s. Um, but yeah, it's similar to you, man. I was in like heavy metal bands, punk bands, doing my own stuff. And then, yeah, this idea just came to me one day. I was Josh, who directed the film. We were eating out at a Korean restaurant here in Brisbane. And I just said to him, did I ever tell you the time that one of my bandmates went absolutely insane and threatened to kill us all and was almost successful. And he's like, no. And then we went over it, and then it just kind of developed from there. But um, yeah, I've heard some horror stories from other people that have been in bands. Um, it just is what it is. You get those kind of clash of egos, and then some people make it their life, I guess. They live for the band. And in our case, with the particular band member that this is kind of loosely based on, we all decided like we're kind of getting too old to be doing this kind of stuff anymore. We're kind of done. You know, we were all getting started in our careers and things, and that band member was the band was everything to him, and he didn't
Hmm.
take it very well at all. So that's where that all stems from.
When I talk to indie filmmakers, both here and both in the States, sometimes a lot of things times you have to do when you have limited resources and limited budget, you have to use what you have at your
Mhm.
disposal, use what's around you. And in this case, you guys had access to this music studio, right? This kind of like rehearsal
Correct.
space.
Yeah.
And it's a unique setting for a horror film. I can only think maybe one or two where I've seen a horror film set like in a rehearsal space, like that. And it works so well because we're talking about contained. The whole point of a rehearsal is supposed to be a contained space. Supposed to be all you guys locked in this room, soundproof, no one can hear.
Mm.
So when it came to finding that space, that rehearsal space, and basing it in there, what type of is there any type of what am I looking for? Difficulties in working in such a contained environment, especially at a time of COVID when you guys are filming, because to be
Yeah.
all together in one space like that, I'm sure it would have come up with a bit of a balancing act there between restrictions and trying to get this film done.
Well, as you know, like in Australia, like we had some of the strictest COVID restrictions in the world. Um, so we were only allowed 10 people at any one time, even though we were a completely independent production. So I guess having such a like we had people like outside the studio waiting to come in and then like swapping over and stuff just because if we got fined or something then that's the end of the production. So we did everything above board there. But yeah, there were times when, all 10 of those people would be in the one little rehearsal room and, maybe two of those people are actors and the rest are camera operators, director of photography, the sound person, the lighting tech, the camera assistant, like all like in this little room. And then you've got to worry about, oh hell, are they going to wind up in a shot? Is there a shadow there? Um, Even with like the boom operator, it's like they had a hard time, getting the boom in a certain spot where it
Mm.
wasn't going to be seen. Then we'd have to rig up mics and stuff like that. But it did help um, with the claustrophobia that we were aiming for. The only difficulty was we ran into one day where there was a double booking. There was a separate section that we didn't really have access to. It was a privately owned, it was still within that rehearsal block, but there was one room that was owned by a local drummer. He like leased it from the
Mm.
property owner himself and he lent it to some friends. And he forgot to mention to them that we were going to be filming that day. So that was a very long day of filming because they were actually in there to record. So we had to, we didn't want to be complete assholes about it because we were both, I know what it's like to be in indie bands. And it's like, if you spend that money to hire that studio and get those people in that room, then you kind of need to do it then. So we actually worked out a deal where they'd do a take and then somebody would come tell us, all right, we're going to be done. You guys have half an hour while we sort out other stuff and then we'd relay back to them. So it just made that, 10-hour day into a 16-hour day, but is what it is.
And while you guys are filming, I imagine you are all still working your normal day jobs as well. And so a
Yep.
lot of your filming, I guess, would be what, nighttime and weekends, or would it just be
Weekends
even more
mainly.
contained than that?
It was mainly, we shot over 13 days it ended up being, but it was like Friday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, sometimes wrapping up at like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning and then having to go to work on a Monday. So yeah.
Um, so when you are in the film, you play the bad guy essentially in the movie,
Yeah.
Bloodface. I guess there's not really any other name accredited to him, but Bloodface is like more the and the reason why you have the Bloodface is because when it comes to slasher films, the mask is a big component or some
Mm,
type of disfigurement or such, a part of the killer. Where
mm,
in the case of your character, he takes the bloods from his victims and he smears it all
mm,
over himself. I don't remember ever seeing that in a film. I think the only film maybe I've seen something even close to that was this kind of obscure William Friedkin film that came out in the mid '80s called Rampage. And where there's one part in the film where the guy does that, but that's only for like 5 minutes or so. This is like
mm.
your character for majority of the time. Where did the
Yes.
idea come from to do the whole kind of blood aspect and put it together? Was it kind of like were you kind of evoking kind of some sort of black metal corpse paint kind of idea kind of thing, or was there something else in mind
Maybe
there?
subconsciously, but realistically, we actually originally we were like tossing up ideas. It's a slasher film. It's heavily inspired by all the classic slashers, everything from Scream to Halloween. And we were like, oh, we should probably get a mask made. And we reached out to some uh, established special effects people, and they were like, "Yeah, happy to do a mask for you." Blah blah blah. But then we got the estimate of what it was going to
Mm,
cost, and it's like, well, that's going to be a third of our budget. We can't afford that. And then I just came up with the idea. I just said, um, "How about we do this?" And then we ran it by one of our makeup artists that did it, and yeah, I've got pretty. I don't know if you can see, but I've got dark features, I guess, like pronounced cheekbones and stuff like that. So once I had to shave twice a day because I can grow a beard pretty easily.
oh yeah,
So
I know what that's like. Yeah.
I know. So I'd shave in the morning. We'd do all the makeup and put the layers of blood on and contacts in and stuff. And then, 10 hours later, I'd start to have stubble again. So we'd have to wipe it off and then I'd have to shave. And
Mm.
um, yeah, it was one of those things that just kind of happened. It wasn't really planned. It was just a thing that we did on a whim and it worked. And like you said, we were kind of thinking like, has this been done before? And it's like we thought of other things where people had taken like somebody's blood and put it on their face or whatever, but it wasn't really done as uh, using that blood to create a
Yeah.
mask, if that makes sense. Because throughout the film, the blood just keeps getting thicker and thicker. And towards the end of the film, you can kind of see like, oh, the multiple layers that are clearly there because it's starting to like get dry and all crusty. And yeah, it was fun.
Please support Matt's movie reviews on Patreon. Get access to exclusive content, request movie reviews and top 10 lists, and help support my work. Please click on the Patreon link in the description below. Speaking of dry and crusty, I've spoken to other actors before who've in horror films that had to deal with working with blood.
Mm,
And sometimes some people have just been like just actually coded in about it into their shoot, like after all the kills and everything.
mm,
And the feedback I always get is that it's not a comfortable experience because the stuff stays on you for a while. Sometimes you might get
mm.
rashes and getting it off your face might not even work. I had some actors even say they couldn't even be bothered wiping it off and they just went to the store with the stuff on, and some of the looks that they got was quite something else. What was that experience like for you after, say, day 13 of having all this kind of like stuff on your face, and having to shave twice a day? I'm sure it would have been
Yeah,
incredibly uncomfortable for you.
it was. I developed a skin allergy and I had to
Hmm.
go to a dermatologist and I had to get God, they put me on medication for it. So I
Wow.
got like really dry, patchy skin, and I was like, well, yeah, that's clearly what it was. But there was one night there because the studio itself, there were like toilets in there, but there was no shower or anywhere where I could really get it all off me. And there was one night where we were filming quite late, and it was one of the nights where we had the van like that the band drives, and there's only two people on set that could drive a manual. And one was Shani, who plays Isla, the lead of the film. She actually picked the van up and drove it to the set. And I just said, look, I'll drive it back to the people that we were borrowing it from. So I was the only other person that had an open license and could drive a stick for American viewers. Um, so it was like a long shoot. We finished at like 3 in the morning, drove it back. Um, and I got there, I put the keys in their letterbox and I got my phone out and I ordered an Uber and I'd completely forgotten that I was covered in blood. And I still had the contacts in and everything because previous nights I'd just drive home, have a shower, whatever. But that night, yeah, I had to do that. And the Uber driver picked me up and just drove me back to the studio where my car was parked. And he didn't say a thing. And he's like, have a good night, and drove off afterwards. And it made me think, what other shit have you seen where this is okay? Some guy's just gotten in the back of your van and is covered in blood from head to toe, and you don't even bat an eyelid. So I'm sure that Uber driver has some stories. Maybe that's a story he tells everyone now.
Maybe that's an idea for another movie. The
It could
rideshare
be.
guy who came out he has a do a job for a slasher killer. He's just covered in blood and such.
There you
That'd be a
go.
good idea.
That could be a good idea, man.
You mentioned before some of the influences that you guys had, especially in regards
Mm,
to the slasher genre and the film being set in the 90s. So some of the stuff I picked up on was fairly evident. Like you have characters named Jamie Lee. They make a joke about
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Prom Night's the name of the band, of course,
Yep.
another Jamie Lee Curtis movie.
Hmm.
Another one I kind of picked up on was the guitar string kills. And again, another Jamie Lee Curtis movie, Roadkill,
Yep.
that as well. And
Yep.
another one, I
Got it.
don't know if this was intentional or not. There's a part in the film where Bloodface
Mm.
there's like a POV shot and it's kind of like a bit staticky and stuff. Kind of reminded me of like Maniac a little bit as well.
Correct.
Was that
You
another
mate,
one too?
you got those 100% correct. They were
What
all
what have
influences.
I missed out on? What other Easter eggs or things have I missed out on so other people might keep an eye out
There's
for?
a line towards the end of the film, towards the big final act, like the showdown, and Bloodface is behind a door, and Isla, who's on the other side of the door. These are kind of like the Michael Myers, Laurie
Hmm.
Strode, kind of relationship characters, and she says a line from Predator.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll have to watch it again and see
Yeah.
if you pick up on it. But yeah, that was just something we threw in there um,
Okay.
as a reference to Predator, which everyone who doesn't love that movie. So yeah, it's a good the one you got some. There's a couple of other Easter eggs in there as well, but I
All
won't
right.
spoil them for everyone.
Like I'll watch it again. For everyone out there, you can watch it on Prime. You can watch it on
Yes.
Tubi. Is there any other places you can think of? Top of your head?
It's in Australia. I think it might be on iTunes as well,
Okay.
but it's coming out on Screenbox in the States.
Awesome.
If anyone is listening in the States, but I'm pretty sure it's also available on Prime in the States and it's also on Blu-ray in the States. But it's going
Very
to be
cool.
added to the Screenbox library within the next couple of months. I don't know an exact date yet, but that's definitely happening. So that'll bring a lot more exposure to the film, which is great.
Absolutely. Your background is
Mm.
like music. I mean, you
Yes.
not only I mean poetry, but music as well. And there's a part in the movie where the character of Bloodface he sings a song,
Mm.
the song "Bliss of Evil." I'm curious when it came to that song, is did the song come first in the title of the song influence the title of the movie, or was it the other way around?
No, the movie was originally it was going to be titled The Bliss of Evil, and I just didn't like the at the start of it, so I just said let's just call it Bliss of Evil. And we always knew it was going to revolve around a song. And so the title of the film came first, and then I just wrote the song based off that title, and I made the lyrics kind of fit the tone of the movie and kind of what was happening. Uh, I guess when you like analyze the film and uh, you can see the connections there.
Because I can't really think of maybe like outside of something like really classic like Phantom of the Opera where music has such a prominent part in a horror
Mm.
movie. I think Trick or Treat from the 80s. I don't know if
Mm.
you've ever
Oh
seen
yeah,
seen
yeah,
that
yeah,
movie.
yeah. That's the one with Gene Simmons and
Yeah,
Ozzy
in
Osbourne. They pop up.
Ozzy Osbourne, yeah, plays a
He's like a Christian
evangelist in it.
preacher or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a TV preacher, right? So you got that movie, and I can't think of anything else there like that. So, well, you got some really rare ground there in that your killer, your slasher, your the monster, the personification of the evil there. He's portraying a soul. And usually a lot of times these guys don't. They're really kind of like shallow vessels and like the only instinct is the
Mm.
violence and the evil. But in this take this there's torture there. There's a certain amount of death there as well. I mean,
Mm.
diving into that kind of part of it, I imagine you didn't want to make just like a cookie cutter kind of like bad guy. You want to just put a little bit more of a kind of like a nuance there.
Yeah, that was something like in the original draft of the script, it was very much just a stock standard slasher villain. And as the rewrites came through, and then once we knew that I was playing the killer, yeah, we all agreed it's like let's do something different, um, and give the character a bit more substance. Um, and there was even things like there's a scene in the film that's like a 2 minute uncut shot of the killer kind of having a bit of a breakdown. Um, and that was something that we just thought of on the fly. I just said to our director Josh and our DOP Damien, I said, why don't we have the character do this? And then we shot that in one take. And that just turned, yeah, I was happy with how that went. And then the song that was recorded live on set, that wasn't one of those situations where I recorded it in a studio or something. I just picked up the guitar and played it. I already knew what I was going to play and sing, but yeah. And again, I think we did that in one or two takes as well.
It's a really good song. I gotta say, like
Thanks.
it's really good, and you did a great job. I mean, I know like that's your bag, that's your thing, but it's like it came across just really good and like really haunting and introspective. And I think the question I always ask when it comes up to this is any possibility of soundtrack, any possibility Spotify playlist, or maybe even what would be so cool, maybe is like a promo video or something of that song with scenes from the movie or something on YouTube. It would be pretty cool
Yeah,
because that song's really strong.
I've thought about that. You're the second person to ask me, like literally within a week, where's the soundtrack? And I've been having these conversations with our composer Nate. Because the plan is to release, but I like we've got the original recording that was done on set, but I've got like a whole idea for the song in my head, but we'd need to record that professionally, like get into a
Mm.
studio, do that properly. Um, But I mean, it could happen at some point. But I think if we do a score, like release it, whether it's digitally on CD or something, we'll definitely include like um, the version of it that's in the film, and maybe the version that like that ghostly angelic character sings as well. Kind of like with Tarantino's soundtracks, he puts like little
Little
sound
blurb kind
bits
of
from the
things. Yeah,
movie. Yeah,
yeah.
that kind of lead into like the orchestral stuff or whatever. So we might do something like that. So it's just one of those things we've been meaning to do it, but I think uh the conversation has always been maybe we'll hold off until the film starts to get a bit of a following, and
Mm.
then we'll drop the soundtrack at some point. But I want a copy of it myself. Um, but yeah, I'm sure it'll happen. I'll let you know.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you love. Please do, because like I really do like the song. Actually, it's actually stuck in my head quite a bit. Because sometimes songs will come up in a horror movie, like kind of like the Freddy Krueger kind of like nursery rhyme kind of melody. That one
Yeah,
two
yeah.
Freddy's coming for you
Mm.
kind of sticks with you after a while, and it becomes kind of like it is it becomes a part of like the overall package of the overall thing. So I think with Bliss of Evil, that can I think there's potential there, really do. Something I found really curious about the movie is that in certain contexts, you can definitely call the movie like a violent movie, but the
Mm.
violence, you don't really see the violence in film.
Yes.
A lot of times, like it'll be the initial and then we move away.
Hmm.
Sound effects are very big here,
Yes.
in regards to that. And then like you might come back to like the aftermath of it or such.
Mhm.
And there's also a very pivotal part in the movie which speaks to like the lead character's psychology and trauma in regards to a sexual assault as well. Same thing.
Mhm.
In that case, though, you're just looking at a door and you're just hearing sounds and such. When it came to that portrayal of the violence and things like that, and not because some filmmakers can go to exploitative route and show
Mhm.
things. In like we've seen horror films and it happens. We spoke about Maniac before, and that's like an
Yeah.
example of that, right?
Yeah.
But when it came to you lot, when it came to those scenes, what were the creative decisions like in going down that road and portraying the violence and the other scenes of surrounding that in the way that you do?
Well, the other big influence on our movie was the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think
Mm,
a lot of indie filmmakers kind of go to that Tobe Hooper original film and pull from it. And if you watch the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like my Blu-ray says R18 plus, the
yeah,
Australian Blu-ray. Point out where you see any violence in that movie.
yeah.
There's virtually none. We kind of wanted to do what Tobe Hooper did. It's very implied. Like even the part where Leatherface, puts the girl on the
What's that?
hook.
The hook? Yeah,
You just see the hook. You don't actually
yeah.
ever see any violence. So we kind of borrowed from that quite heavily with the way that they shot the violence there. Because I've had conversations with people about Bliss, and they were like, "Oh, that scene there was gross or whatever," and I'm like, "You didn't see that." So it's kind of getting the viewer to fill in the blanks. Because I think the scariest thing is what you can come up with yourself,
Mm,
particularly with whatever's going on behind that door. I mean, that was kind of like a group decision. And partly a lot of it was on me as well. I'm sure Shani would have been quite comfortable um, doing whatever was required of her because she's, uh, much more professional as an actor than I am. But even when we recorded the sounds of what was happening behind that door, that was done in one take. And that was because I had to stop because it made me feel very uncomfortable. Um, so we were lucky we managed to get it all in one take because I remember saying to the sound recordist when we did that, I said, "Did we get that?" And she said, "Yep, all good." And I said,
Mm.
"Good," because I'm not doing that again because that made me feel
Yeah.
so uncomfortable. Um, so we feel like, yeah, we were just kind of all on the same page where we're like, we don't need to show what's going on here. We should leave it up to the viewer to, whether it's the violence or the assault that happens and things like that. I think it works in the film's favor.
Um, Going back to a correlation with music and movies, especially in the context of horror,
Mm.
um, when we're talking about that, it kind of reminds me sometimes with lyrics in songs, even though a lyric might suggest one thing, a lot of times it's the listener and their own kind of like how they interpret things, and that
Yeah.
can frame a song. I remember watching a documentary about heavy metal censorship of heavy metal in the 1980s, and that
Mm.
was a time when they had that big Senate hearing about music,
Yeah, with Dee
especially hip
Snider
hop
from
and metal.
Twisted Sister.
Exactly,
Mm.
Dee Snider, and he's one of his songs was brought up by Al Gore because Al Gore's wife was part of this big lobby group
Yes,
that
yes, correct.
and he's like, your song is talking about, sexual blah stuff and torture and stuff. And D Snyder's like, look, the song is actually about me having dental surgery, but if that's what you think it is, then maybe your head should be checked and not mine.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much an infamous kind of like back and throw. And I think when it comes to movies like Bliss of Evil, where you said before, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, other movies, even like Scarface, the De Palma one, like even there's
Mm.
moments in that where they kind of move away from stuff and you don't see things, but the interpretation of it is so strong that kind of goes in your psyche and moves stuff. I think
Mm.
it's funny how sometimes our own dark reflections kind of like create the manifest the things in our own mind, and we
Yeah.
can't help but say like if someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, that scene was really gross," you can't. I think some people can't help it because their brain kind of tricks them into thinking they seen something, right?
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
think that's the power of the art, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. I agree.
So you got Bliss of Evil out there for everyone to watch. You
Hmm.
actually showed it in the States first before Australia, right? I mean, that was like a big
Yeah,
thing. And that's
it
something
played
that
in.
I've spoken to a lot of Australian filmmakers, Indian filmmakers. That's the route a lot of them are going down now. What was it for you guys that you were shown for to the American audiences before Australian audiences? Where was the decision there in doing so?
Um, Look, I don't want to speak for all indie Australian horror filmmakers, but I probably know most of these people you've spoken to, and it's not by choice.
Mm,
We're not given one in Australia. We're not really supported at all.
yeah,
Um, as horrible as that sounds, it shouldn't be that way. But Bliss played pretty much every major horror film festival in the world. Like it played Austria, Germany. Austria was the first place it played. Um, it played in the UK at several festivals. It played at, God, some major, major horror festivals in the States. Um, we've had a lot of support from overseas. And just getting it out in Australia has just on Prime has been a real hard slog. And I know it's hard for a lot of indie horror filmmakers. It never used to be this way.
mm,
Go back 5, 10 years, and anyone could, release their movie. They get it put out on DVD by a local distributor. But I think there's just been this flow-on effect from major big studios, particularly one run by Little Mouse, um,
mm-hmm,
with the when major companies say we're not going to supply physical media to your country anymore, then the smaller distributors they get put out of business.
yeah.
And that's happened. You look at how many indie distributors in the last 10 years in Australia have just don't exist anymore. I've got a massive like DVD and Blu-ray collection, and
Mm,
I go
yeah.
through it and I put it on and I go, oh God, I remember when that distributor existed. And now
Mm,
there's only a couple left in Australia. You've got like Madman and and Umbrella, and that's pretty
Umbrella,
much
yeah,
it. There used
yeah,
to be, so many different. There was Shock. There was oh God, there was probably like five that just kind of disappeared in the
yeah.
last 5 to 10 years. So yeah, I think that's just a flow-on effect from major US studios, you know, unfortunately. So there are a lot more indie distributors in the States and in the UK and in Europe. And talking to people from overseas, particularly like in the States, and they ask you like, "Oh, so what's the support been like in Australia?" And you're like,
Yeah,
"We got into one festival here, and that's it."
yeah,
See, Australia, even with the festivals in Australia, if you get into one festival, you will not get into a second festival. They've got this very select way of doing things. So if we got into a festival in WA, then that'd be it. We wouldn't be able to play at a festival in Queensland, even though it's like a 6 hour flight from Brisbane to Perth. Where in the UK, you can play at a festival in London, play one in Liverpool, play one in Manchester, or in the US, you can play one in New York, then you can play one in Boston. It They don't care, but here it's very, very hard. Like I know Australian filmmakers that will probably never get a release here.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. And
Which
I
is
know,
really sad.
just speaking to people who do like, say, horror movies or comedies or even action films as well,
Mm.
or genre stuff, when it comes to any type of financial support or
Yeah, you
distribution
won't get
support
it.
as well,
You won't
you
get it.
won't get it. And I think a lot of times is because there's certain types of film that's earmarked as to like
Mhm.
that gets pushed, and everything
Yeah.
else just gets discarded aside. And unfortunately, a lot of times a lot of the stuff that gets pushed is the stuff that people interpret Australian film to be, but it's not the whole scene, I think.
Mm. But when you talk to foreigners, right, and the amount of panels and things I've done over the last 12 months to promote Bliss, like at various film festivals and things, when you talk to people from the UK, people from the US, people from Europe, when they talk about Australian film, you hear The Babadook,
Yeah,
that's a horror film. You hear Wolf Creek, that's a horror film. You hear Mad Max, might not be a horror film, could be interpreted as that, but it's certainly a genre film.
yeah,
So, and now, you've got Talk to Me,
got to
which
be,
is
yeah,
the big one. So we're known internationally for our genre films. We're not known for 90% of the stuff that gets produced here. No,
yeah,
outside of Australia, nobody knows. Like as great a movie as like something like The Castle is,
mm,
no one in America knows what that movie is, but everyone knows what Wolf Creek is.
yeah,
Everyone has seen The Babadook. So it blows my mind that Australian, like the funding bodies as well as the general public, don't really get behind
yeah.
local Aussie movies, and that kind of blows the minds of other people as well. Because if you're a local horror filmmaker in Japan, the Japanese will be the first to support you. You don't have to go to South Korea to get the support before. It's a bit backwards how we work here.
I think so. I do think so too, and that's like what I'm always trying to do is try to put the spotlight on these things in
Mm,
filmmakers such as yourself and what you and your crew do. And I think, I mean, what's the next step for you guys? Is it to keep progressing forward, making more films, more genre films like this? And I know, like we were speaking kind of like off air about,
mm.
some ideas that are kind of gestating. Is the hope that um, with the hope, sorry, well, is the goal more, yeah, your films are going to be targeted towards the demographics of, say, the US market?
Mhm.
Is that kind of like more of the hopes of the genre style, the filmmaking style,
Well,
or is
I've
it the
got
hope that you want to make something Australian made that is open, that the Americans in the UK especially like anyway?
well, that's the thing. Like with Bliss, like it's a very Australian film.
Yeah,
Like all like even and people overseas like it. So
Yeah.
you can't use the excuse of, oh, it's Australian, they won't like it, because they do. Like,
Mm.
especially you know what horror fans are like, man. They've got the most broad, open minds in within any kind of community. Like, they're open to watch anything as long as they're
Yeah.
going to be entertained or challenged in some way. They're quite happy. But I've got two films in development at the moment. The first one is called The Conservatory, and I've written that film for another Brisbane filmmaker, Tristan Barr. I don't know
Okay.
if you
Yeah, I
know
know Tristan.
Tristan.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
indeed.
did a movie called Subject,
Yeah.
and Bliss of Evil and Subject played at Monster Fest together. And that's how Tristan and I kind of connect. He actually lives like 5 minutes away down the road from
Okay.
me as well. It's just really weird. Um, and we've kind of had a similar journey. Um, and his film Subject is a very, very good film. Uh, so I had this idea for the conservatory for quite some time, and I got it down on paper, and it's looking like that potentially will be happening at some stage this year. I don't know how much I can say, but it's looking like that will be American money
Mm.
that funds that film. Um, so who knows? Like, I like it. Obviously, we want to make that here and use Australian talent. Um, but then the other one I've written is called Blood Claw, and it's very Aussie, very Aussie. It's an Ozploitation film through and through, very heavily influenced by Brian Trenchard Smith type films, but it also has that kind of slasher stuff that Bliss had, and then movies like Undead, classic, another Australian horror film our overseas audiences know and
Yeah.
love. So yeah, two very different movies. But whether or not they both get off the ground, I don't know. Like, they're in very early. Well, the scripts are done pretty much. Um, but yeah, it's all about money, mate.
Yeah.
Getting financing. So Bloodclaw, we'll we'll probably make both films regardless. But the Conservatory is a film that actually needs a decent budget behind it, and I know my limits as a producer and a writer and potentially a director. So with the conservatory, that's why I've said Tristan has to handle it, because it's a gothic horror found footage film.
Right.
So imagine Suspiria mixed with old Hammer films, mixed with Japanese extreme and French extreme cinema with found footage elements. It's
Mm.
my script notes have the most fucked up violent movie ever to be made in Australia.
Mm. Which,
So that's what we're aiming for.
well, before we even get to that one, everyone out
Yes.
there needs to watch Bliss of Evil.
Yes.
As we said before, available on Tubi, Prime, iTunes, we'll talk
Yes.
about as well. I encourage everyone to check this movie out. It's a really great homegrown indie slasher film. It's a movie before, like we talked about, has references to certain slasher films, so it also becomes a part of, the great slasher film canon. It's like another
Mhm.
chapter in that as well, especially in regards to Australian filmmaking. And Corey Hinschen, just want to say thank you very much for your time today. Thank you very much for your movie. And
Thank
best of luck
you.
in regards to the release here in Down Under. And I know like people in the States love the film, and now we have to get people here behind it as well, so we get more films like this made, because it's very important, I think. These small films, I think, keep a lot of things afloat for the indie market in Australia, if they do well. So thanks again for your time today, and hopefully we'll
You're
talk again
welcome.
soon.
Yeah, definitely, Matthew. I'm happy to come back anytime. I love talking movies, man, as you can tell.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.